Hello, Hockey World. Today is Monday, November 17th, 2014.
I'm Ryan Garner.
I'm Ty Anderson.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockeybuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Eklund and Kevin Allen are up in Toronto at the Hall of Fame ceremonies, the induction tonight. Kevin is being inducted at the Elmer Ferguson Award for Hockey Journalism, and we congratulate Kevin on that. But we will carry on without them today. X said he might drop in, but probably he's going to have his hands full, and we'll see him tomorrow. So the three of us will move forward with the events of the weekend, starting with the Montreal Canadiens, the league-leading Montreal Canadiens. Get used to hearing that. The Habs win 3 games in 4 nights. On the weekend, they beat Philadelphia, and they go to Detroit and win 4-1 with Dustin Tokarski in net. They now lead the league with a 14-4-1 record, 29 points overall. Ty, I don't know how they're doing it. Carey Price is not playing out of this world. They're not scoring an inordinate amount of goals. Their goals against isn't fantastic. You've seen them recently when they played the Bruins on Thursday. What's the secret to this team?
Right now, I think everything's clicking throughout their lineup. You look at what these guys are contributing. Guys like Lars Eller, Pierre-Alex Parento. These are guys that I don't want to say you didn't expect much out of them, but they are players that they're not known as their big scorers. So when they start contributing, along with the Pacioretty, Desharnais, Brendan Gallagher even, you really have a dangerous mix up front, and I think that's really helping them out. And I think Sergei Gonchar has really slid in there perfectly as a stable, bottom pairing, power play specialist type defenseman. And your goaltending doesn't need to be out of this world good when you have contributions like that across the board.
Ryan, PK Subban signed to that monster deal in the offseason. He has 12 points. Their leading goal scorer is Max Pacioretty with 8 goals. So there's nobody like standing on their head and doing like fantastic things. They're just getting a lot of offense from a lot of different places and getting good enough goaltending, and now they've won 6 games in a row. I predicted this team to be a wild card team. What did you think?
Well, I predicted this team would win the division, and I'm kind of embarrassed for that because I thought Price was going to be Vezina caliber. I thought the Canadiens were going to pick up from some of the momentum they had from last year's playoff run. And then you watch them, and after the first 5 games, I was like, nah, I am completely wrong about this team. They're a train wreck. They're a mess. They came out east and lost to pretty much everybody west of the Mississippi that they had played. And then they went back and they've won 6 in a row, and you just look at it. It's a team that doesn't have the stars up front. They don't have one line you have to shut down, but they have 3 solid lines that you have to contend with. And really, that's the way they're winning games. They're winning close games. They're coming from behind to win games. We've seen it a few times in the third period. They just don't give up. And I think they are, in many ways, the Calgary Flames of the Eastern Conference. Similar type of makeup, similar type of game plan where we don't have to rely on 1 or 2 guys up front to handle it. Subban hasn't been a beast, but they find a way to get it done, and good for them.
Yeah, Michel Therrien just seems to be pressing all the right buttons, which I know I've been a critic and X has been a critic of Therrien and his tactics, but they seem to be working. I know that they usually get old after a while, and then players will start to turn on him, and there was some aspect of that last year, but so far, yeah, they're just I don't get it. I've watched them, and I don't know how they're being this successful, and I think eventually what's going to happen is they're winning games that maybe they shouldn't. And there probably will be a stretch where they'll start losing games that they should actually win, and things will balance out. I still think this team is a wild card team, maybe third in the Atlantic Division, but right now they're hot, and I guess people who don't like the Canadiens will just have to hold their nose and just not pay attention. Well,
but I did like the Gonchar move, and I like that they weren't facing a situation where the sky is falling. We have to do something. They looked at an area they needed to address, and they said, does this move make us better? And it clearly has. Travis Moan wasn't doing a whole lot for him. I think he's on his last legs. Sergei Gonchar might only have a season or 2 left, right? I mean, he's 40 years old, but I think it sends a message to a lot of teams out there who are saying, no, we have to wait. We have to wait and make sure that we know what we have. We can't act rashly. We can't disrupt the chemistry that we have, right? Because there are a lot of teams out there that need to make moves. And I think the Canadiens showed you don't have to wait till you have a 4-game losing streak to pull the trigger on a deal that's going to make your team better. And so I hope that rubs off on some other GMs who have really sat back and watched their team kind of plummet down the tubes here early in the season.
And Ty, this is a symptom of good cap management when it comes to the Canadiens being able to add a player in Gonchar who was making $5 million a year. I know that Dallas kept, I think, $800,000 of that salary. They send back Travis Moen, who's making less than $2 million. Mark Bergevin has that flexibility to do that, as opposed to teams like Toronto and Boston, who are so much against the cap that they're really limited in what they can do to address some problems.
Yeah, and you look at what the Habs did this summer. I mean, it's Tom Gilbert and Manny Malhotra. These guys aren't breaking the bank, and that really allows you to make a lot of moves, especially in season. Which I think you get criticized when you don't sign a big name player, especially in Montreal, especially with the whole Thomas Vanek thing when he walked and they didn't really find necessarily a replacement for him. But you look at what those kind of signings do and how they allow you to make these moves. And the funny thing is, the Montreal, they can still make more moves if they'd like. So I think that's pretty interesting in and of itself, is that the Habs are still in a good situation where if they have even more areas that they want to concern, come closer to the deadline, they can still do that.
I think it's pretty certain, with the exception of one or two teams, that parity has been set forth in the NHL this year. Other than Buffalo and maybe one other team, I think most of the teams are within striking distance of being in the playoff race. Now we had a couple games this week that were sort of outliers. Bottom-dwelling teams beating teams that are higher, significantly higher in the standings. I just wanted to get your opinion on which one was the more strange outcome. The Florida Panthers are going on a 4-game road trip. First game was in Anaheim against the Western Conference leading Anaheim Ducks. The Panthers have been offensively challenged this year. That's an understatement. But they score 6 in a 6-2 victory in Anaheim on Sunday night. That was one game. The other one I was at personally at the First Niagara Center in Buffalo, where I would say the building was 75% Maple Leaf fans. The Leafs facing the 30th place Buffalo Sabres, who up to that game had averaged 1.3 goals per game. And they open up a 6-pack of whoop-ass on the Leafs, 6-2. All the Leaf fans leave disappointed. Ryan, you first. Which one was the more, or the less predictable outcome?
I thought the less predictable outcome for me, just watching how things played out this week, was the Toronto loss. Because after beating the Bruins the way they did, I started thinking to myself, are we wrong about this Leafs team? Are they good? Right? Are they shocking the world at this point? And then, of course, everyone expects things to come crashing down Friday night against the Penguins, and they come out and play a solid game. They keep it close, right? It could have gone either way, I felt. Maybe get a bounce or two in the third period there. It could have been a different outcome for the Leafs, who played hard, who played well. And then they come into Buffalo, the house of horrors, right? Mike, you know all about that, and absolutely just crap the bed. I was very, very surprised by that. I shouldn't be at this point. The track record, if you're going to bet against the Leafs going into Buffalo, but that surprised me. And I wasn't really surprised about the Florida Panthers because I have expected them to improve this season. I'm a huge believer in Dale Talon. Even though the results haven't been there in Florida since he arrived, I think this is the year for them to start making some positive moves forward. They have some good young personnel in there. So, you're going to have games like that in the National Hockey League where you go on the road, things fall right, you catch a team taking their foot off the gas pedal, and you're able to come out with a big win. But that Leafs loss for me was just a stunner.
Ty, the Leafs did play really well. I think their best game of the year against the Bruins on Wednesday, and we know what the Bruins did in Montreal. It may have been more of a symptom of the Bruins being down than the Leafs, playing really well. I'm not going to take anything away from them and their performance because I thought the Leafs played great on Wednesday, but it was sort of a spotty effort in the loss to Pittsburgh on Friday, and then they laid the biggest of eggs, an ostrich egg in Buffalo. I mean, of those two games, the Florida Anaheim contest and the Leafs Sabres, which one did you think was the more surprising outcome?
I think the Maple Leafs losing just because Buffalo is so bad. I know that's a bad building for the Leafs, but Buffalo is terrible, and this is a team that they're not trying to win. I mean, I hate saying that. This was a team that was built with the intention to lose way more games than they'd win. So I think anytime you lose that's pretty bad. But going back to the Florida-Anaheim game, Florida, I think Al Montoya's had a pretty good season so far for backup anyways. He's kept them in games a lot. I also think that Corey Perry, after missing all that time, he returns. Obviously, there's going to be a bit of a connection there that they have to redevelop in a way. I know it sounds crazy because it gets Getzlaf and Perry, but still, I think that when you miss that kind of time, it takes a while to get your body back engaged. So you can kind of see that coming. Plus, their goaltending has been a train wreck these past few weeks with Anderson and LaBarbera. Maybe they should bring Rolison back out of being goaltending coach, put him in the net. It can't be any worse. So I could see that one coming almost. Granted, I didn't know if it'd be Florida that would do it, but those kind of games happen, and you saw that happen to the Ducks. But I go back to that Leafs game. That's a game that when that offense is clicking like that, they should run over the Buffalo Sabres every day of the week. Doesn't matter what building it's played in.
Well, a couple things ancillary to the discussion on that game. With the loss, the Leafs in the last 16 games in Buffalo are 1-14-1. It's not just a trend. It's brain cramp central. They just cannot win in Buffalo. It's psychological more than and talent, because I think both teams, over the last, say, 7-8 years that 16 games have been played they've been better than the Sabres at one point, maybe a little less, but 15 of 16 losses against a division rival is inexcusable and I don't know, it's unexplainable. And it was, like I said, it was about 75 to 80% Leaf fans, and to the point that the Sabres mascot was being booed because there were no Sabre fans in the crowd. And when the game was was decided, Leaf fans were so upset that they threw paraphernalia on the ice. I think a scarf and maybe one jersey. So that's happened for the third time this year. The pro Toronto crowd yelling "Let's go Raptors" and Argos, and it's just, and razzing Reimer in the third period whenever he made a save because he couldn't make a save in the first two periods, stuff like that. But then the more interesting thing was after the game, where Randy Carlyle was exasperated that he could not explain why this team would play the way that they played against a team that they should beat. And Phil Kessel, Phil Kessel, who has never been a fan of the media, when asked from one Toronto reporter for a comment, and I was standing like 10 feet away from this, but I didn't hear it, so when asked for a comment on the game, Kessel told the reporter, "Get away from me." So, just a cacophony of errors and bad decisions, and made even worse over the weekend by Leaf fans who decided to abuse James Reimer's wife on Twitter, which to me is completely inexcusable. Ryan, we've talked many a time about the Leaf fan base, the Leaf Nation, and how their up and down ways really throw them into a tizzy. The Edmonton fan base is similar, but I can't, I guess I'm too close to it. I can't explain, I can explain the frustration, but I can't explain the way they express themselves sometimes.
Yeah, it's pretty corrosive, isn't it? Because this is not a team that, trust me, if they want to trade places with the Oilers fan base, by all means, let's do it, right? Because they'd burn that city to the ground in the middle of November. Oilers fans look at Leafs fans and they're like, what are you complaining about? You lost to the Sabres, big deal, right? Things happen. It's hockey. Any team can beat any other team on any given night. You know, you're currently, if the season ends today, you're in the playoffs. What are you complaining about? So it's one of those things where, no, certain fans and certain people have a way of either not recognizing that a line exists or not caring whatsoever, right? Because there aren't any repercussions. At least when you're in the arena, it saves people from, you know, making jackasses of themselves, because they can be thrown out, they could be banned for life, they could be arrested or fined. But social media is the wild, wild west, right? And so, unfortunately, you're going to get some boneheads who take it upon themselves to just take things too far, and it's unfortunate because I think I don't think we've seen it in any American markets, but definitely in Canadian markets we've seen it with spouses, wives, and girlfriends and things, and there's no place for it at all. It's absolutely ridiculous. At the end of the day, it's a hockey game, right? It's something that we all enjoy. Sure, we get ticked off when our favorite team doesn't play well, but to take it that far and make personal attacks or take it off the ice in that way, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the one more thing from the weekend. A sad note for the Dallas Stars. Their talented 19-year-old sophomore Valerie Nikushkin, groin problems and other problems that he's been limited. I think he's played 3 or 4 games this season. It was announced over the weekend that he's going to have hip surgery and he will be out for 4 months. This is a significant loss for the Stars, who have not had the start that a lot of people, including me, thought that they were going to. They're 6-8-4. They've allowed 61 goals against so far. So scoring hasn't been their problem. It's keeping the puck out of their net. Ty, do you think that Nikushkin's loss for probably the balance of the season is like the final nail in the coffin, or do you think this team can still recover and contend for a playoff spot in the West?
I mean, I think they can still contend, but they're going to need bigger contributions from these other guys, these supporting cast members. You need Elias Hemsky to score more. Eric Cole's another guy. I know he's a bit older, but he can provide some scoring here and there, and they'll need more of that. But you look at what his loss does. You know, this loss in Nikushkin here, and you look at Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin and how they'd really like to have that player on that line. That'd make that line that much better. You look at their game last night in Chicago, I don't think Ben nor Seguin had a really great game. And it just seems like they're missing that other factor on that line. I know Seguin's had a great year goal-scoring-wise and point-wise, but it's tough. When you play a team like Chicago, they can target you, especially in their building. They can be on you all night long, and that's what you're noticing, I think. That's what you'll notice when they go up against these elite teams. So you'd like that other factor on that line. I don't know if Hemsky is that guy. He's probably better suited for a second line role with Jason Spezza. So putting him in those minutes is going to be sort of baptism by fire, I think. He did play top line minutes, throughout his time in Edmonton and even Ottawa, but at this point in his career, he's better suited for that second line role. So bringing that back around, they definitely could use another scoring punch on that line. But the problem is, who do you get? You can't replace someone with that kind of skill set, I think, unless you talk to Carolina and you say, hey, give us Alex Semin. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Ryan, do you think the loss in Nikushkin finishes the Stars, or do you think they can still somehow get back in the race? I mean, they're not way out of it right now, but the road that they're going down in terms of giving up a lot of goals, and they have enough offense, I think, to make a contest of it. But I don't know whether Lettinen can be a force in goal, and I don't know if their defense is deep enough, especially after trading Gonchar. What do you think?
Well, just kind of piggybacking off what Ty said, I don't think they're deep enough at any position, really. Look at their defense; it's pretty paper thin, right? And then you take away Gonchar, which sure he wasn't giving you a whole lot, but at least it's an experienced body back there who can provide some stability. Right now, they're looking at some young kids who don't really have much NHL seasoning back there, especially for their bottom pairing on defense. And up front, if you're not getting production from Jamie Benn, like Ty said, Eric Cole and Ales Hemsky's been a total disaster there, and so you don't really have a second line, right? When you have Seguin and Jamie Benn hasn't been producing the way he did last season. I don't know if there's the injuries issues have plagued him or if he's just working on getting back up to speed, because he can play much better than he's proven so far. And Lettinen, what do you do with Lettinen? The guy's signed long term. You're basically stuck with him, and he's not providing enough in between the pipes to compete there in what we've, I think, unanimously agreed is the best division in hockey. And so you're seeing the Stars getting passed up by teams like St. Louis and Minnesota, Chicago, and really I see them being the worst team in that division, especially when you look at the improvements that the Winnipeg Jets have made to their performance, and they're starting to gel as well. And Colorado's a mess, but they're starting to show signs of coming around. So Dallas, it's a strange thing. I did not expect it when you looked at some of the big names that were arriving there over the offseason, but again, it has to be the right fit. And one of the numbers that stands out to me is Jason Spezza being a -9 so far. I know that he's putting up points, but when you're a negative to that extent, far and away the worst on the team, something has to be done there.
And Jason Spezza's name might be coming up in a little bit with our next subject, because after the Hall of Fame ceremonies tonight, the GMs, the league GMs, stay around in Toronto for their meetings, and I think we've started to see, sort of a percolating scene of trades in the last few days. We saw the Gonchar deal to Montreal, as we were talking about. Jordan Leopold, the veteran defenseman, gets moved from the St. Louis Blues, and probably a cost-cutting move for the Blues. He's a UFA at the end of the year, and Feder Tutin got hurt in Columbus, and the Blue Jackets needed a veteran patch for their blue line. But traditionally around American Thanksgiving, that's when teams sort of take stock around the 20-game mark, and they make the decisions of whether they need to, have some sort of shake-up or, change the chemistry of the team. Ty, you first. I basically said let's think of two teams that you believe we should be on the lookout for in terms of making a deal. Not in the next week, but I would say before Christmas. What do you think? Give me what your first team.
First one's right here in my backyard, the Boston Bruins. I think you're seeing what they're trying to do now. Matt Bartkowski is getting more playing time, and I think that's something that deep down it will increase his trade value. I don't think Matt Bartkowski finishes the year in Boston. He'll probably be a throw into some deal that they want to make. For Boston, it really comes back to what do you want to focus on? What do you want to add? Do you want to add a defenseman? Do you want to add a forward even? Because you can really use that either on your third line or your first line. So for Boston, it comes back to what they think they need more and what they can get for a lesser price, I believe. So I'd go with Boston, and maybe out west, I would probably have to say if the Winnipeg Jets feel that they are for real, I think they should stock up and add at least one more player to make that team even better than they've already played so far.
Ryan, what are your two clubs?
Out east, I look at the Philadelphia Flyers making a move. I think Ron Hextall, I know that he's talked a lot about some of the pieces that he'd like to add. He's not shy about addressing his own team's needs, and I know that especially with talking about acquiring a defenseman, he's right out there in the front line saying, hey, we're starting to turn over every stone, see what's available there. And so I would expect the Flyers, if they're looking to make a move, if they're looking to unload Vinny Lecavalier, I'm sure there would still be some teams who are interested there. I see that deal getting made. I see some big changes going on with the Flyers before they fall too far back the pack, right? Because there's kind of been a shift in the balance of power in that division where you're seeing the Islanders rise up. I think the Devils have been better than people have expected, even though their goaltending hasn't been great. I see the Flyers making some moves before they get left behind. And out west, I agree with Ty. I think Winnipeg was the team that I had pegged because because you look at they're winning games and they've only averaged 2 goals per game. They're doing it without getting any offense whatsoever. And so if they can deal from a position of strength, I think they have a lot of depth on their blue line. And we know that there are a lot of teams who are looking to add a blue liner, add a guy with some experience, whether it's a Bogosian, whether we finally see Dustin Byfuglien moved. I know that there's been talk of moving him seems ever since ever since that team arrived in Winnipeg, it seems like he's been on the trade block. So
Yeah.
I could see that happening for a scoring winger just to give them a little more offensive punch up front. But that's a team that it's nice to see that they're finally giving the fans up there something to cheer about.
Yeah, for me, the team in the West that I think is most likely to make a deal, and if they do, it'll be not earth-shattering but significant, is Colorado. I think that they've seen the after effects of letting Paul Stastny walk. Last year, the situation I think would have been perfect for them to keep Stastny and trade Ryan O'Reilly, who's given them difficulty on 2 separate occasions in terms of an offer sheet and then a 3-week holdout on a deal, and he will be an unrestricted free agent after next season. As of a couple days ago, he was leading the team with a negative, I think it was -11 plus minus, was not playing well. The team is not getting the goaltending that they normally had that they had from Varlamov last year. They're not scoring as much. The veterans like Briere and Iginla have not replaced of Stastny, and they've moved McKinnon and O'Reilly in the middle when they had both of them at times playing on the wings. So I think, and I'll be specific, I think O'Reilly is probably going to get moved before the deadline. I don't know if it'll be before Christmas, but I see if they continue to struggle the way they're going right now, I see an O'Reilly deal in Colorado before the trade deadline. In the East, I'll stick close to home as well. I think the Sabres are going to make a lot of deals probably before the deadline. I think they'll make a couple deals before Christmas as well because they can see an opportunity to move guys like Chris Stewart and Drew Stafford, who are UFAs, get something from teams who are looking for scoring forwards, and that will just help them in their pursuit of finishing 30th and drafting either McDavid or Eichel. But I do think that the Maple Leafs will make some sort of move. Maybe, there continues to be talk about Jake Gardiner. The thing that holds that deal up is if they can get what they consider equal value for him. If some team is offering a draft pick, they're not going to do that because he's 24 years old and has a lot of upside. But if they can find a team that will give him an equally aged player making around the same amount of money, that needs a change of scenery like Gardner may need, I think that there's a deal to be made there. So we'll see what happens. Talking about the Hall of Fame induction, tonight, I'm sure most of us will be watching at least a little bit of it. We have Dominic Hasek, Mike Modano, Peter Forsberg, and Rob Blake, the players that are being inducted. The late Pat Burns in the builder category, referee Bill McCreary in the officials category. The Chicago Blackhawks play-by-play man Pat Foley is the winner of the Foster Hewitt Award, and our own Kevin Allen is the winner of the Elmer Ferguson Award for hockey journalism. Ryan, you first. If you want to stick with the players, because I'm sure both of us have watched them many a time in our, over our lives as hockey fans. What player, brings the most pleasant or the most or the worst memory you can recall of the ones that are being inducted tonight?
Well, the one that sticks out is, no disrespect to the other guys because Mike Modano had a fine career, Rob Blake had a fine career, but Dominic Hasek was the dominator. But Peter Forsberg is the class of this class, and he is the only player that we've seen really inducted into the Hall of Fame for a while, I think, as far as players go, who was at one point considered by everyone to be the best player on the planet, right? And he had the battle, people had the debate. Who is it? Who's better, Forsberg or Lindros? But I think just watching Forsberg play, I know I was an Oilers fan growing up through the 90s, watching his Colorado Avalanche teams just destroy the Oilers, right? And he was such a strong player on the puck that he would literally just shrug guys off, right? He would do what he wanted, excellent stick handling, tough as nails, and some of my best and worst memories of watching him were just seeing nights where he'd put up 4 points and you could see why. There are some guys who get their points quietly, but Forsberg was never one of those guys. He was always around the puck, attracted it like a magnet, and he made you pay. There are some guys who are able to create their own chance, and he was the prototypical guy when you look at just creating open ice for himself and making the most of it. Now, so there's good and bad memories there, but I think the one thing that stands out as well, as far as negatives go, because every silver cloud has to have the dark lining, is the 2006 Olympics. And I'm still a little bitter about this because it was such a debacle for Team Canada and Team USA. But the fact that the Swedish team kind of took their foot off the gas so that they were able to play Switzerland in the elimination round. And Peter Forsberg basically admitted, he's like, yeah, we didn't really try. We're just kind of giving them one because we didn't want to face either Canada or I believe it was the Czech Republic at that point in that first elimination game. So, it's one of those things you kind of remember as like, come on, you dirty shyster. But tons of respect.
Tactics, Mr. Garner. Tactics. One thing, Boreas Salming in Toronto on Friday when they had the Hall of Fame introductions before the Leafs-Penguins game. It actually was in the first intermission. He related a story about Forsberg. Apparently, when Salming was at the end of his career, after he played for Detroit, he went back to the Swedish Elite League and played against, a 16-year-old Forsberg, and essentially, Salming, while the play was stopped, went to impart his wisdom on Forsberg, saying, you can't play that way. You're gonna kill yourself, because he was apparently being rather rough and tumble. And Forsberg told the elder Salming to F off, which just shows that was the workmanlike ethic and the will of Forsberg, even at a young age, to be the player that he was. And we can go on for ages to say who the better player, Lindros and Forsberg. If Lindros hadn't had the concussion, what would have happened to his career and what he would have won. Ty, who gives you the most pleasant or the most negative memory of this induction class?
I would definitely have to go with Mike Modano. I mean, this was a player who, for me, American player, so it was always cool to see that. But the first cup that I remember being extremely into was the Dallas Stars and the Buffalo Sabres Cup, when it was Mike Modano and Brett Hull and Eddie Belfour and all those guys. And I hated the Sabres. I hated them so much because they're a big rival of the Bruins. A few years back was Mayday and all that stuff, and there's something about the Sabres I did not like, and I think it was Michael Pekka. That was probably the player I couldn't stand. I absolutely hated him. So it was cool to see Modano in that era. And I even loved Modano's last game as a star. He scores the game-tying goal, and he wins it in the shootout. He scores in the shootout for the team, too. That was a really cool moment. For me, though, it is Pat Burns. He didn't spend too long here in Boston. He was the coach of the Bruins, though, and he had this attitude that he just loved. I remember this game back in the late 90s. It was a bit of a rivalry between the Bruins and the Washington Capitals. They met in the playoffs, I think, once or twice. And there was a moment where a line brawl broke out. And it actually was Byron Dafoe actually fought Ole Kolzig that night, which was very, very funny, too. And this is back when Ron Wilson was coaching the Capitals. So this brawl is breaking out, and Burns looks at the Washington bench, flexes his biceps, and points at all of them. And I thought, wow, what a badass this guy is. So that was always, I think, one of the cooler moments for me was seeing Pat Burns, just being this no-nonsense coach that really kind of, as a young fan, seeing a guy who had that kind of attitude, I think, was really cool, and it established some pretty high sort of expectations for Boston fans in terms of what they expect out of their coach on a yearly basis. And it's funny, Burns, again, he was not here very long and the teams weren't that successful, but people still talk about Pat Burns as the coach of the Boston Bruins and what he was and what he did for this organization. So he's a guy that finally, he deserved it a long time ago. It's sad that he can't be here for it, but it's very well-deserved honor for him.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo that about Pat Burns and my little story. I mean, let me just say that Modano in that '99 finals apparently played the last 4 or 5 games with a broken wrist. So that that's pretty surprising and pretty a statement on how great of a player he was, that he was still able to play effectively with a broken wrist. And Hasek, I believe me, I'm as much of a have as much disdain for the Sabres as you do. I mean, you can't deny Hasek's fantastic ability. I mean, he would make saves that no other goaltender could make. He would always flop around in the crease. He was so unorthodox, and teams could not beat him. And the only way that they ended up beating him was strange, fluky, shots. I mean, it was never the 100-mile-an-hour slap shot. It was always the flubber that beat him.
Yeah.
But Pat Burns is the one who gives me the most pleasant memory of this induction class, because as coach of the Maple Leafs, he brought that team sort of out of the late 80s, early 90s doldrums. Cliff Fletcher brings him over from Montreal, and 2 memories I can remember were the Leafs going into Montreal and beating the Canadiens, and that was the first time that he had beaten the team that, I mean, they didn't fire him. I still am a little cloudy on the circumstances of why he left Montreal. I mean, I've read a few different things that, they were going to fire him, and he sort of beat them to the punch or whatever, but there was clearly an emotional thing for his team to step up and beat the Canadiens in Montreal. And the other is in game 1 of the '93 Western Conference Final with LA, when Marty McSorley takes the run at Doug Gilmour, and then Clark and McSorley go at it in a fight, and Pat Burns had to be held back by security from knocking the block of Barry Melrose off. And honestly, for a lot of fans, maybe a lot of media types, it would have been enjoyable to see that long-haired jerk get his head knocked around. But I've never met Barry, so I'm just talking about it from 20 years ago when I was purely a fan, and I was not impressed with Barry Melrose or Tony Robbins or anybody else that was involved with the LA Kings. So there you go. Okay, let's touch on some of the news that's been coming up in the last hour or so. The Minnesota Wild have activated, and in the one fell swoop have waived goaltender Josh Harding. Harding is making $1.9 million last year of his deal. He's a UFA at the end of the year. He missed most of the end of last season and the playoffs with complications of MS, and then missed most of training camp and the entire portion of the regular season because of a broken foot that occurred in an off-ice incident. Now, Ryan, there are a number of teams, Edmonton and a few others, Anaheim, that probably could use a goaltender right now, and this guy had a 1.65 goals against and a .933 save percentage in 29 games last year, and his contract is not completely out of whack. Do you think a team bites on Josh Harding?
I think someone bites. Now, I'm always a little wary, especially when it comes to Minnesota Wild goaltenders, because I don't know if the numbers necessarily reflect the quality of the player. Having said that, the Oilers got a pretty good goaltender named Dwayne Rolison once upon a time who led them to a Stanley Cup final, so we know things have a way of working themselves out. But I don't know, there are some concerns there simply because of obviously some of the off-ice health stuff. There's a concern there, unfortunately, and it's unfortunate for him. I know that he's battled through it, and hey, you got to tip your cap to him because it's phenomenal. But it's still something that teams have to think about when bringing him on. Now, that contract that he's on, it's not onerous at all. It's basically no risk, right? Because you're basically just saying, well, if you have the cap space, go ahead and do it. So if you're a team that does not trust in its starting goaltending at all, and you're willing to give them a shot, I think it makes sense. I think there are a couple teams that fall into that category, and so I think you'll see a waiver claim be put in, which is pretty bold to predict because we've seen a lot of players go on waivers, and I can't remember off the top of my head very many that have been picked up in the last 6 months. But yeah, I think you could see a team take a shot at it.
Ty, I think this screams Anaheim. I mean, with LaBarbera, with Gibson hurt and he still has options. LaBarbera is, barely an NHL backup, and Anderson, I think, needs some help.
Mm-hmm.
Harding makes all the sense in the world there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Especially when this team, you look at what Anaheim, everyone said, oh, they're going to get Marty Brodeur. They're going to get Brodeur. They don't get Brodeur, and they still need help. So you think that they would do it, via the trade market or the waiver wire. And I think if Harding is still out there by the time the Ducks have their say, I think he could land there for sure because something's got to give there with LaBarbera and with Anderson. I think Frederik Anderson's a great goaltender, and I think he has, he will be their starter in the playoffs. That's just my feeling. But I do think that it is sort of a tight rope for him. With Gibson waiting in the wings, and you bring Harding in, you give him some competition, see how he responds to it. I think that's kind of a goal. He's only been here for a little bit more than a year now, but he seems like a goaltender that likes that competition, likes being a part of a platoon where he doesn't shoulder the entire load of starts and in the crease. So I could see Harding fitting there, but going to what Ryan said, I think the Edmonton Oilers. I think if they can get him, I think it wouldn't surprise me if they tried it. Maybe they go with a 3-goalie system, like the Islanders used to, or even Winnipeg to a degree. So we'll see there. I'm very curious to see, but I don't think there's a chance. I don't think there's any chance that he clears. That's just based on what he did last year and the upside. That low risk, high reward. No chance that no one puts in a claim for him.
Yeah. Some interesting comments from Gary Bettman in Toronto. He's there for the Hall of Fame and probably there for the GM meetings as well. He's got he touched on 4 subjects. I'll talk about the first 2 and then then get your comment on them and then the next 2. Bettman commenting on NBA Commissioner Adam Silver's tacit approval of the legalization and regulation of sports betting, says the NHL isn't susceptible to the level of betting as other sports, and that NHL games account for only 1% of the Vegas books. So I think what he's saying there is that the NHL giving their thumbs up to that wouldn't have an impact on revenue coming in because nobody bets on hockey, which I'm sure in Canada when they play Pro Line and stuff like that, yeah, people bet, but in Vegas, I think the hockey book is very, very infrequently bet. The other subject he touched on was the logos on NHL jerseys. Bettman does not like it, and he says the league will only go down that road if everybody is doing it and there's boatloads of money, meaning I'm assuming he means the other professional sports, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA. Ryan, I mean, I don't foresee advertising on jerseys being to the extent that we see in the Swedish League or in the KHL in the next 5 to 10 years, but maybe down the road. What do you think?
I really hope not. Simply because the jersey, I mean, the NHL is the only sports league out there that I can think of where the jersey and the logo are so sacred that they have the carpet on the floor, don't step on it, don't throw the jersey, don't let it hit the floor, that kind of thing. And that definitely does not happen in an NFL locker room. Major League Baseball, forget it. Those things just don't happen to the same extent that they do in hockey. And so with the history of the game, especially with the original 6 franchises, you just hate to see them tarnished. And I'm a traditionalist to the point where I don't like teams that don't have an S on the end of the name. Like I still don't like the Minnesota Wild, I still don't like any of the. I still don't like the teal from the San Jose Sharks. Right? It's like, come on, can't you just put something together that's a little more traditional, a little more grounded in the history of the game? So I'm old school that way. So I definitely do not want to see the full. At what point is enough enough? At what point are we saying, hey, you know what? That's something we don't need to do to chase revenue, because you should be able to be a profitable league and have profitable teams without resorting to having advertising on the jerseys.
Yeah.
Ty?
In terms of betting, I bet on NHL games sometimes, just with friends and whatnot, playoffs, and it's funny, you do look at these gambling websites, these sports books, they do have NHL sort of bets and lines, things like that, but it's nowhere near the intricacy of a football one or a basketball one for that matter. So I can see where Bettman's coming from there. In terms of the advertising on jerseys, I'm okay with it if it's practice jerseys and if you want to put a little decal on the back of a helmet, go for it. But when you start putting logos on jerseys, I think that's when you really, it's a thin line, I think, in terms of what is acceptable and what's not. You don't want to ruin the smoked bee or the maple leaf or the CH, the winged wheel. You don't want to put Dunkin' Donuts above it. That's really nothing that you want to hang your hat on, I think. And I can see where Bettman's coming from, where if the other leagues do it, they'll start to do it because that's what the NHL is. They're kind of a copycat league in that regard. So, once the other three have it, the NHL will get it. But I don't think it's coming anytime soon beyond practice jerseys. Like you see Detroit and Boston so far with that. So I don't worry about it as much as some people are right now because I don't think it's actually going to happen anytime soon. But it is a case to be made that the NHL does make money when they can make money. So we'll see there.
Yeah,
one thing. I guess I just complain about the corporatization of these sports, right? And of course, to go take a walk, old man. But still, when I see Rogers Arena, Rogers Center, Rogers Place, it's like, isn't this enough? We know what Rogers is, right? You're not some little mom and pop shop no one's heard of. So I don't know. It's kind of strange.
I know that snow removal company was angling to get their emblem on the Colorado Avalanche jersey, sort of a cross plug there. But okay, Bettman continued. The league's participation in the 2018 Winter Olympics in South Korea is not currently on the NHL's radar. They are concentrating more on getting things settled with the World Cup, which is expected to be played first in 2016, I believe. That's the plan. So there's, apparently things still to be rectified with the IIHF, and I have a feeling there's going to be some sort of quid pro quo there between, them having a World Cup and revenue coming to the NHL through that to get them to go to the Olympics. I wouldn't be surprised. The other situation is expansion, which we've been has been popping up. Vegas is the most recent one. We've heard Seattle, we've heard Quebec City, the second team in Toronto, Portland, Kansas City, blah, blah, blah. We can continue to hear about it. Bettman says the Board of Governors will be updated on parties interested in getting expansion franchise next month, but said that if the NHL were to expand tomorrow, it would be 2 or 3 years before the team or teams joined the league. So even if they announced a city, they wouldn't probably play until 2017 or 2018. Ty, do you think expansion's a foregone conclusion?
Yeah, I mean it has to be, right? I mean you look at the league setup right now. You got 16 teams in the East and 14 in the West. The West, as good as it is, you have an easier path to get in and to make some noise. So I think that at some point that has to be rectified. You look at what markets like Seattle and even Las Vegas, I think, to a degree, can bring you. I love the idea of the NHL in Seattle. I think you look at what it's done. The Seahawks, the talk of the town. The Mariners even had a great year attendance-wise towards the end because they were in the playoff hunt. And you want to look at something that's kind of interesting is the Seattle MLS, the MLS Major League Soccer, Seattle Sounders, I believe they're called. They do insane numbers as far as attendance goes, and their fan support is through the roof. So this is a city that they like sports teams, and I think losing the Sonics kind of sort of energized that city to be like, oh, we need to support our teams, and that was never an issue with the Sonics. We're getting off topic here, but I think that is a city that the NHL could work wonders in. You have that natural rivalry with Vancouver, based on how close you'd be. So I think that's a fit there. Las Vegas, what have we been hearing for 3 years? The NHL wants to be the first pro sports league with a team in Vegas. And I think that'll happen. I know there are risks there with players and gambling and the partying and whatnot, but I think that will happen. In terms of you look at what it means, though, expansion, I think you want to add 2 teams in the West, but they're also talking about a second team in Toronto or Quebec City. You can't put those teams in the West, right? So I don't know.
Well, Toronto played in the Western Conference for in the '90s, so it might be a stipulation for the Leafs giving their thumbs up to a team in Toronto that they play in the West. Ryan, by the way, I think there's another opportunity for advertising if they name the Seattle expansion franchise. Since all of them are S's, they could call them the Seattle Starbucks and have the steaming cup of
Oh,
coffee as the emblem. What do you think expansion? Do you think it's coming for sure, or do you think this is just a lot of talk?
I think it's absolutely coming for sure. The league realignment that they did for absolutely no reason pretty much puts the writing on the wall. Like Ty said, it's coming, it's happening. We had all better get used to it. And a lot of people complain about it and saying you're watering down the product, but I like it. I like the idea, right? I was part of this, well, the league needs to contract, not expand argument for a few years, but when you really break it down and think about it, where have we seen the best, highest level of hockey with the best players on the ice? It was at the Olympics earlier this year, and quite frankly, those games sucked because mistakes, entertaining hockey is born out of mistakes. And when you have the best defensemen on the ice, when you have the best forwards, there aren't many mistakes. You get low-scoring games, you get the best goaltenders. If this was a 20-team league, it would be boring because the teams would be so good. Yeah, you'd have like, wow, this is great. Look at all the star power we have on the ice. But the game kind of grinds down to a stalemate in some ways where it's like, well, we are so good you can't score on us, and you're so good we can't score on you. I don't see how expanding it out to 32 teams kills the league. If anything, it just gives us a few more games to watch, a few more bad teams, a few more things to talk about, and it balances out the league. Because having 16 teams in one conference and 14 in the other is absolutely ridiculous. And also, when it comes to the debate over whether or not we're going to the Olympics, could we just decide on it and say yes or no and put it in writing for the next 30 years so we don't have to have this stupid discussion? I could see the NHL pulling off some stupid thing where they say, okay, we're not going to Korea, but then the next time it's in North America or it's in a nice European market, they say, okay, we're back in, and you're back and forth jumping in and out the same way they've done with the World Cup or Canada Cup or participation in the All-Star Games. So just pick a side and stick with it and save us all the trouble of agonizing over it.
I truly believe it's being used as a negotiating ploy to leverage, to get the World Cup, because they're never going to get revenue from the IOC as for participation in the Olympics. So if they can get revenue from a World Cup, then they just go to the Olympics for exposure. As for expansion, I think it's a foregone conclusion. It would make sense for me to expand to 32, have 16 in each conference, which would give teams like areas like Seattle, Portland, Houston, Vegas, Kansas City the upper hand. I do think that Quebec City is going to get a team. It's probably going to maybe be a team moved from a situation that is not like a Florida if things continue to go badly there, but. I don't see a second team in Toronto, at least not in the near future. But they have a chance to basically make $1 billion in expansion fee from that. But I think if the NHL wants to go to war with Bell and Rogers, I think that will be like the last option to put an expansion team in Toronto. But we shall see. But
here's my question about that, Mike. As someone who with ties to Toronto and everything like that,
yeah.
Isn't that area so ingrained with Maple Leafs fans that it'd be tough to just throw a new team in there and say, hey, this is a new team in your city?
Right.
How would that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always made the comparison to the LA Lakers, who were there since, I think, the late 50s, and then the LA Clippers moved from San Diego after moving from Buffalo. That was in the 80s, and it took them a long time, and they're playing in the same building, too.
Yeah.
It took them a long time to develop their own fan base, and now they're a better team. The Lakers are lousy now, and the Clippers are really good, but they're still that. Everybody in Los Angeles, or I'd say 80% of the basketball fans in Los Angeles are Laker fans. Yeah. It's going to be 90% fans in Toronto are going to be Maple Leaf fans. This argument that Leaf fans who are dissatisfied you had about 15,000 of them in Buffalo on Saturday who were dissatisfied, that they'll immediately go over to become fans of this second team in Toronto, and that they'll be able to get cheaper tickets. No, a new team is going to charge just as much because it's Toronto, and their loyalty has been with that franchise for 98 years. So will the team make money? Sure, because you've got an area of 10 to 12 million fans anywhere between Kingston and Niagara Falls, for example, that would maybe be willing to drive an hour to go see another team, but it's not going to be cheaper tickets, and the team will, if it's an expansion team, will be lousy for a few years while they build up. So, and I don't think the league would ever allow a team to be transferred into Toronto. That would be they're going to make money on an expansion team if it goes to Toronto. So
You're exactly right, Mike. You're exactly right. And I mean, look at the Ottawa Senators. That's not a market that's near Toronto. It's closer to Montreal. But in many ways, I don't want to piss off all the Senators fans, but in many ways, those fans aren't real fans of the Senators. It still has that expansion team feel. Okay, we're rooting for this team because we hate someone else rather than because we love the Senators and love what they've done. And they've been there for more than 20 years. Like, of course, there are some hardcore fans. They've had their issues there. But still, it's okay, this isn't really our team. To the extent that some of the similar, I mean, I would argue that you have better fans in Tampa Bay or San Jose or even Nashville in markets where they say, okay, this is the ticket in town. You're not rooting for us because you're not paying attention to someone else or you loathe someone else. It's because this is representative of the town, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a fan base in Quebec City that is still the remnants of the Nordiques fan base that are still waiting around. I mean, I'm sure Colorado was very popular in Quebec City because that's the franchise, but if there's an expansion franchise or a transfer that goes into Quebec City, those Nordique fans that are still around, it was only 20 years ago, so they are still around. They will attach themselves to that new team. I don't think they became Montreal Canadiens fans, or I don't think they became Ottawa Senators fans. I think they sort of became like Los Angeles fans of the NFL. They just became fans of the league and watched the games all the time. But if there's a team in their city that they can root for, they will do so. So
exactly. It's just like Jets fans. When the Jets moved to Arizona, they followed the Coyotes for a couple of years, but after that it was like, well, they're down there, we're up here, we don't feel a connection with that. And then once the last of the players leave who are on that Winnipeg team, once they're gone, you're like, people have no connection to that team anymore. And then the Winnipeg Jets move from Atlanta, right? And all of a sudden, okay, this is our team, And so I think you're going to see a similar situation happen in Quebec City there.
Well, great show, guys. We'll watch the Hall of Fame induction ceremonies tonight, and there are, I believe, 1 or 2 games tonight. I know the Rangers are playing Tampa Bay, so it'll be Marty St. Louis facing off against his old line mate, Steven Stamkos. We'll discuss that with Eck, and I don't think we're going to have Kevin tomorrow. I think we'll have him on Wednesday. But enjoy the festivities, enjoy the games, and we'll see you tomorrow. Remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.